is Johan Kreer. Ek sal help om te fasiliteer. Vanoggend regs van my is Dr. Dirk Herman, hy is die bestuurshoof van Solidariteit. Hy sal vir ons 'n inleiding gee en langs hom is Marius Kroukamp, hy is die adjunk hoofsekretaris wat gemoeid is met die staal- en ingenieursbedryf van Solidariteit. So u het media pakke ontvang. Dankie vir die voorbereiding daarvan. Daar binne is 'n persverklaring en ook 'n stokkie. En Dirk sal ook sy toespraak na die einde vir u beskikbaar stel en die aanbieding sal natuurlik ook beskikbaar wees. So net wat betref die program, soos ek sê, Dirk sal 'n inleiding gee en dan sal Marius 'n aanbieding doen en dan is u welkom om vrae te vra of opmerkings te maak. En ja, daarna nooi ons u graag uit om verdere onderhoude te doen en ook saam met ons verversings te geniet op die stoep. So ja, nogmaals baie welkom en sonder verdere verwyl wil ek dan vir Dr. Herman vra wat dan gaan oorslaan Engels toe om 'n inleiding te gee. Dankie.
Baie dankie Johan. Ek het al vertroulik verneem dat die Withuis luister in op hierdie spesifieke perskonferensie en ook vertroulik verneem dat president Trump waarskynlik in die volgende uur 'n belangrike tweet of twee gaan uitstuur oor wat ons hierso gaan sê. In die lig daarvan gaan ek Engels praat. So, ladies and gentlemen, the world is on the brink of a steel world war, and the winds of war are blowing fiercely across the globe. The US against the world, and the war drums rumbles in other industries as well. No country can be neutral in this specific war. Solidarity is not the European Union, nor a country. And in the bigger scheme of things, a trade union can be seen as insignificant, but workers pay all. Countries will lose a percentage of GDP, companies will sacrifice turnover, or they will sacrifice a percentage of dividends, of profits, but workers pay all. And from a worker perspective, the casualty of this trade war will be the estimated 7,500 workers in the South African steel and aluminium industry losing their jobs. The downstream effect can't be calculated in full. The effect of other industries like motor manufacturing that can follow is not part of this worrying figures. When the elephant fights, especially two giant bulls like the US and China, workers, wives and children are the grass that suffers. We've seen what happened at Highveld Steel. Workers and their families paid the Chinese price. Solidarity rolled out the social plan. We hand out food parcels, helped with trauma and other counseling. It will not be President Trump that must absorb the suffering of ordinary workers. He will not hand out food parcels to a worker in a blue overall or even a former manager. It will not be President Ramaphosa or Minister Rob Davies or even CEOs of companies that will hand out food parcels. It will be solidarity. Workers that help workers. Although in the bigger scheme of elephant fighting, it might seem that grass are irrelevant, but they suffer the most. That is why the grass cannot be neutral in this war. Solidarity thus decided to enter the war. Our battlefield will be on the diplomatic front with US diplomats in South Africa, a process that already started. We will let workers' voices be heard at the White House and the US via lobby processes and a petition directly to the White House. And we will put pressure on the South African government. And lastly, we will be the Red Cross in the war. Marius Krookamp, here on my right, will give more details on this. President Trump has declared this trade war on the proclaimed ground of national security. First amongst its enemies in this trade wars stands the second biggest economy in the world, China. Along with China, other world steel powers such as the whole of Europe, Canada, and Australia find themselves no longer exempt from paying import levies on steel and aluminium to the USA. On the southernmost tip of Africa, South Africa, a small player in the international steel and aluminium industry, is also caught up in this raging steel war. With South Africa's export constituting only 1.4% of the USA's annual steel imports and 1.6% its annual aluminium imports, one would have thought that South Africa's exports to the US can in no way be considered a threat to its national security. While South Africa's export might be small fry for the USA, it is a big deal in the South African context. Formerly exempted from USA import levies on steel and aluminium, South Africa's steel and aluminium industry during 2017 exported more than 11.8 billion rand in steel and 4.8 billion rand in aluminium to the USA. Despite not posing a threat to the USA's national security, Trump's scrutiny did not pass South Africa by. South Africa's alignment with China as a member state of BRICS, as well as its snubbing of the USA and frequently voting against it in the UN, certainly did not help to soften or avoid Trump's blow. We play with the wrong friends. Keeping the company of China also had an effect on the local steel industry. China, being the biggest manufacturer of steel in the world, continues to dump cheap steel on world markets, thereby forcing steel prices down. The dumping of Chinese steel has in the past consistently caused Chinese steel to be available in South Africa at a cheaper price than the cost of input to manufacture steel locally. China's steel dumping played a major role in eventual demise of Highveld Steel, which in turn led to a crisis for the local business community and the community at large. More than 1,900 permanent jobs were lost at Highveld, a further 13,600 other jobs in downstream industries, and the local community were lost because of Highveld's closure. Following several years of consecutive negative growth, the domestic metals engineering sector during 2017 fought its way back to growth of 2.7%. Trump's blow will change this landscape and will lead to a jobs bloodbath. South Africa has an open economy, and we cannot afford walls. How many Highvelds will emerge from this, only time will tell. Like I said, solidarity will not be neutral, waiting for the effect of the steel war to play out without taking proactive steps to minimize the distraction that will certainly come because of Trump's war. Today we announce our four-pronged strategy to fight the steel war. We will actively do our part in the war to ensure that our members and the biggest steel community receives our support in the difficult months and years that lay ahead. And then Maurice Krookamp, one of the experts in South Africa on this topic and Solidarity's Deputy General Secretary of Metal Engineering, will now elaborate on our strategy.
Thank you, Dirk. You hear me? Right. In this presentation, what I would refer to as a steel war, because as Dirk has alluded to, it is a steel war. Francois? Solidarity has been involved with the South African steel industry for a very, very long time. The major crises that emerged from 2014 onwards, the closure of Highveld Steel, and in response to that, we launched a campaign called Save Our Steel. The photos on the presentation, one can see we're busy currently with a roadshow right through South Africa, where we talk to employees and members of a union and explain to them and discuss this crisis of the industry with them. We also engage with government in this process as well. Now let's get back to the topic of the day, the steel tariffs. One back. Good. One jump. I think that sums up what's happened the last week, Thursday. In fact, this cartoon came from a while back, but certainly one had the impression previously that the target of these tariffs that were introduced were towards the dumping of Chinese steel over in the markets in the USA and worldwide. But we've seen that even Canada did not escape the tariffs last week. These tariffs were introduced under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. Very old American legislation was dusted off, and it basically proclaims that steel industries around the world pose a security threat to the national security of the American industry and in the American military. If one looks at those investigations that were done, there was a few sets of these documents. That's the top page of the steel document, where the US has gone into motivating while they implement these tariffs. And the latest one, obviously, that they're busy with is motor. Tariffs of 25% on steel, 10% on aluminium. Then the risk for South Africa. Figures quoted by CISA, estimated 7,500 jobs at least in the value chain. That means from the producers to customers, to transport, and so on. But when steel plants close, this is what happens. Next. This is a picture from Highveld Steel, where we had to support the community, we had to support our members, we had to support workers, that they survived their basic daily needs. We had to hand out food parcels and other things. And ladies and gentlemen, this is what Mr. Trump refers to as the national security threat. Does that look to you like a national security threat? Poor workers, people who work for a living, who are affected when steel plants close. Next. This was Highveld when it was operational previously. Operational, one could see all the products being manufactured in the background. Next. And when Highveld closed, the yard by the structure mill, there's nothing happening there. It's like a ghost town. It's terrible. And that's the type of thing that we as a union face when steel plants close. Next. We are saying as solidarity that we are fighting back. Our workers and our members are not a security threat to the United States. We have to push back. We have to push back against unfair trade policies. And we also believe that the government, the African government, should consider opting for the WTO, the World Trade Organization, options in terms of dispute procedures. Why we are saying that is that we've had extensive discussions with government, with the role players, and it's obvious that the negotiation route is not bearing any fruits. And the only option, the only legal option available to our government is to utilize, like China, like Canada, like the European Union, is to opt for those dispute routes. Although they are onerous and they take a lot of time, it's the right way to do, because what the Trump administration has done with what they did under 232 is to bypass the established procedures, to bypass the established norm of doing things, and just throwing this piece of legislation and impairing tariffs on industry and on countries. And we are saying, well, let's go with the established routes. Let's keep the legitimacy of the World Trade Organization in place. Next. Our campaign is on 4 legs that we're rolling out. There's domestic engagement. We'll get into the details just now. There's international engagement. There's a social plan and a recovery plan. Domestic engagement. We will continue to engage with the Department of Trade and Industry and where needs to be as well, the Department of Economic Development. Those discussions are ongoing. We as Solidarity have a good relationship with the department. There are officials in the department who do a lot of hard work to try and help the industry. So we will continue our engagement on that. And as well as industry role players, there are associations, there are employers. We will engage with our union members and continue to do so with workers. And obviously the US government representatives in South Africa. From the consulate, we have met with them twice in the last few weeks and discussed the details around these tariffs. International engagement. We are approaching labor movements and trade organizations, labor organizations in the steel industry in Europe, Canada, and in America. We have, and we will introduce a exciting development. We have registered a people's petition on the White House petition website, and that will enable workers in South Africa, steel workers and fellow South Africans to support our call to the United States government through the White House to give South Africa relief from these tariffs. We'll get into a little bit more detail about that soon. We'll petition the US consulate in South Africa. That will be an official solidarity document that we'll hand over in the next 2 weeks to officials there. And we will also explore from our side what options are available to us ourselves as a labor movement in terms of the International Labour Organization and as well as the World Trade Organization. Next. The social plan, a document that was developed after many years of engagement in retrenchments and downscaling. I'll just give you the headings of the chapters of that document and the areas that we engage in. It looks at proactive measures to prevent job losses, sound legal and fair procedures in terms of where there are retrenchments. Alternatives to retrenchment should be explored, measures to mitigate the negative effects of retrenchment, and Solidarity social responsibility and support network being Soltech, our training institution for artisans, where we can assist members with alternative training, and the Helping Hand, which is our social leg that rolls out support in terms of food parcels and so on. The recovery plan, that could be extensive. We look at possibilities of business rescues where needs be. Best practice examples, and I just want to quickly elaborate on that. I think what's happened at Highveld Steel is a good example of a best practice. The entire plant closed down in 2015, 2016, and there was a revival of a portion of the plant being the structure mill last year, where they've gone back into production with a manufacturing agreement with ArcelorMittal, and the utilization of the assets of the Highveld area, where they've created the industrial park. I think it's a very good example of where you possibly cannot revive the old giant, but you can utilize the structure to give people employment and to bring something back to the families and to the local economy. And then also an option available in terms of the Department of Labour and the UIF as a training layoff scheme where workers are put on a training and paid a stipend. Those are all part of issues when you engage with business rescue. Now, the People's Petition to the White House, we've registered that petition. We'll elaborate on the link just now. And this is very important. It's not just for the steel workers in South Africa. We are going around the country now and talking to our members and steel workers at different plants. We did so last Thursday at ArcelorMittal and Vanderbijl Park. We want the voice of the steel worker and the voice of South Africans in unity to approach the White House to say to them, we do not take this, we do not stand for this. We need to have exemption from these tariffs. We are not a threat to the US national security. Just the link and we'll give more details. There's a SMS number that you can send in the word SOS to, as well as the Solidarity website. There will be a link. Next. When you click on those links, it takes you directly to the White House petition website. If you leave the Solidarity website, you're on the White House petition website. It looks more or less like this. Just next one. If you scroll down, it will require people who want to support the petition to fill in their name, surname, and email address. This is very important to try and use a private email address because the White House is very attentive to possible bulk mailing and so on. Next. Once you've click that link and you've submitted those details, the White House will send people a generated email back, which says that and basically asks that you confirm that it's your email, and then your vote will be registered. And it's very important. We are chasing a target of 100,000 votes. At this point in time, the petition is only visible through the link that we provide, but as soon as we have 150 votes or petitions signed later today, it will be published in full on the White House petition website. I just want to get into some threats that's lurking on the horizon. I think these are very, very, very serious threats as well. And one is AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which provides for benefits for South Africa and sub-Saharan African countries. There's a very strong indication, even through the engagements with the diplomats, that this will be reviewed. There's a very important requirement in AGOA, and it requires that private property rights must be protected. And we know that currently in South Africa, there's a debate around land and property rights and private property rights, but one should take cognizance of the fact that it's a condition of AGOA that private property rights must be protected. 600 US companies do business in South Africa. 64,000 direct jobs have been created through AGOA. The second threat is, I think, linked to what we're currently dealing with. The Trump administration has initiated investigation into motor exports into the USA. There's a lot of exports going into the USA, specifically from Germany and South Africa, South Africa being the second largest exporter to the US after Germany. 18.6 billion rands worth of exports last year, around about 37,000 vehicles from South Africa. If one looks around the corner, Roslyn BMW X3 is a sole exporter to the US of that model through BMW. This could lead to massive job losses. We'll be keeping a close eye on what's going to happen here. This is a very threat to South Africa's motor industry. As you know, that South Africa's motor export program is derived on subsidies, export subsidies, and should that provision collapse, it's a very serious threat for the survival of the South African motor industry. Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Scott. I'm a journalist from Engineering News. You mentioned that the Chinese steel can land here at lower than we can even the cost of the input costs for steel. What can we do? I mean, we're talking about electricity prices are probably going up. I mean, the only thing we have are the commodities. What are you guys' thoughts of how we should approach this long-term, medium to long-term?
It's quite a dilemma because, as you know, the Chinese steel is highly subsidized. Well, there's two ways of looking at it. One train of thought says, well, the state, the capitalist state model in China subsidizes steel from interest rates to land, to energy cost, to transport cost. It's subsidized steel. It creates an artificial steel price which is lower than the real price, and then it lands on the world market at a very low price, below what other countries can produce it. The second thought is that China has got brand new factories. They are efficient. They are geared for mass production. But in the end result is the same. You got artificially lower steel coming onto the world market, and it's a challenge to all economies. And that's, I think, where the argument around fair trade comes in. And each country then has to protect its own environment and its own steel industry. In South Africa, there's a few steps that were taken in the past few years. We've introduced tariffs of our own. I must just say that that's very different from what the Trump administration has done. They just have slapped tariffs on countries in a haphazard way, whack, and then you've got to come back and argue for mercy. South Africa has followed the rules and the procedures of the World Trade Organization, which is exhaustive. It takes more than a year to implement a tariff, and it's per individual product made by a manufacturer, and they've got to apply for those tariffs. And you go through a process of investigations. You go through a process of public hearings and findings and recommendations, and in the end, they've got to determine whether there was dumping. And one of the absolute requirements for dumping proof is if it's sold at a lower price in your country than it's available on the domestic market of the source. And then obviously the government will make a decision in the end whether or not they give relief. So it's very difficult. I think we've more or less reached the end of that line. You cannot continuously telegraph it in artificial measure. It does not promote free market, although we deal with an abnormal situation with subsidization of steel. It's important, I think, countries have got to engage in the different trade groups and pacts and see what they can do on a political level. But it continues, you're right. China's put out record amounts of steel in March and April. South Africa's dipped a little bit in April. We'll have a look next month what's happened, why that's happening. But yeah, you got to do your best, but you cannot continue to slap tariffs. Regulations regarding localization is good. State entities got to procure their state for structure build locally. That's a regulation that came into being last year, April. I know that the railway renewal project as well, railway line, that's been localized, so it's got to come from South Africa. The good news for us is that the only mill capable of rolling that type of and size of railway line is the Highveld structure mill. But still, even though, I think they still require a little bit of protection to enable that. So localization is, I think, one of the only other options available. But nature being nature, people will always try and find the cheapest product and bring it in somehow, and it's a tremendous challenge. We attended a custom and excise meeting with SARS the other day, together with role players of the industry, and it's alarming to see what China is trying to do, trying to bring steel into South Africa, whichever way they can, bypassing regulations, even changing the substance of the material to get past the codes. And customs as well, there's a challenge for the customs officials to recognize and to identify the correct products. Industry is trying to address that as well. So it's a continuous fight. It's nothing but a war to try and keep these things off our market and to protect our local jobs and economy.
Amanda from News 24. I'm just wondering, what are the prospects of a campaign succeeding, considering that we're dealing with the David and Goliath type situation, where Trump is like a bully and he's basically told most countries, we don't need you, and given everybody a middle finger.
Not Trump.
Well, I mean, it's quite a tough one. I know it's good to attempt, but I mean, what are the chances that?
I think Marius can maybe say something more. But what's important for us is that there's a lot of role players in the world that's affected now. And it's literally a war. And we call it a world war on steel. And the different role players must take up their part. And it is not anymore only a war between America and China, where America argues exactly what Marius, you argue, that what China is not busy with fair trade, and therefore America retaliate with a tariff war. It went further than this. It went much further than only China. It rolled over to the whole European Union, Australia, Canada, etc. So it's a much bigger. So Trump simply went too far. And what we are quite convinced is that the pressure of the world is now becoming bigger and bigger. We see every day 2, 3, 4 press conferences just on this. And one element of that war is the workers' voice. And that's only one element. But that specific element is necessary in this fight. So what we thus say is that we are only one piece of a big war puzzle. But we must put in our piece in that specific puzzle. So we have a responsibility. It's really, in all respect, we don't think solidarity will win the war against Trump. that we are strong, but not that strong. But we know that if everyone in the world do that part, we think the pressure can become too big.
I think that if one looks at voices domestically in the USA, it's not all for Trump out there, because the tariffs does not have just positive effects. There are negative effects as well. I mean, I think we start with the soya bean farmers and so on. So it's important, like Dirk said, you got to push back. You can have one of two approaches. You either lie flat and be trampled, or you can get up and fight. And that's what we're calling upon. We're going to stand up for the workers' voice. We're going to mobilize workers' voices around the world, like I said, in Canada, Europe, and America. And we've seen with Theresa May, we've seen with the Canadian Prime Minister, we've seen with the French Prime Minister and President, they're all standing up. And together, I think we can invoke a power strong enough to change some of the minds in the USA. It will take time, but as long as we push back together, I think we can bring sanity back into the whole trade war issue.
Would you be willing to work with other unions, like, just thinking of like the other unions?
Oh yeah, with no doubt.
Would you be willing to join forces and put your differences aside and
With
say,
no doubt.
it's a workers' issue,
Yes.
and we've got it's a common issue, so let's get together, because then the voice would be louder coming from South Africa,
Yes.
rather than just solidarity on its own.
Yes, with no doubt. And we will work with other trade unions, especially with NUMSA. And even further than that, I think we can find trade union voices across the world. And we've decided now, following this announcement, to contact the small, not the, stuff like that. And we will and we will also contact international trade union. We have a lot of contacts internationally on the trade union front, and we know there's a lot of uneasiness even in the US, because trade union federations there are organized across borders, even the US and in Canada, and suddenly you sit in a situation where one trade union members will be positive in the US, but quite detrimentally in Canada. So with no doubt, yes, I think this is our small part. With a trade union like NUMSA and others, it's much bigger. With more international trade unions, it will be even more.
Scott here. Wanted to know, I think this might be going outside the envelope of what we're discussing here, but just briefly, any thoughts around energy input? I mean, we have fairly expensive energy at the moment, but we are seeing some changes, and while we might not be able to forecast with any certainty, do you see maybe any change in the specifically the energy market required for steel and aluminium production? Are there any green shoots yet, or maybe what are your thoughts on that one? And excuse me, I don't know, thinking here about changes in generation and technologies.
I think that this links with one of the threats of the industry, and that's carbon tax, and that's coming online next year if it goes through Parliament later this year. And that's frightening, because the technologies in this industry does not exist to comply with those levels that were agreed to in Paris a few years ago. Moody's has put out an extensive report in that regard, and it's a huge challenge. When your industry is under pressure, and like in South Africa, it's barely surviving, there's limited funding available to invest in that technology. However, I think that technology is being developed in Europe. It will take time, and I think it is necessary. I think we all have to move towards a green economy. One day we'll all drive electric cars as well. But I think there should be opportunity to give space and time for the industry to be able to do that. Otherwise, if you introduce carbon taxes, for example, next year on this local industry of ours, the steel industry, all it will do basically is be another tax. That money will not be utilized. It cannot change behavior because tax is supposed to change behavior in terms of the environment, and one should, I think, be strategically clever how you implement that. But certainly the companies we have spoken to, they want to move towards that, but it will take time.
I just want to elaborate again a bit more about this two last legs of our action plan, and that is the recovery plan as well as a social plan. Because using Dirk's comparison and latching onto the about what can workers do. In the end, like Marius said, is when at grassroots level, it's often the grass that has to start rebuilding after the war is over, and we foresee, like in the Highveld instance, that if this all plays out like we think it will, that we will have a big leg of giving social support to all workers and the community at large, but also recovery. And I think our stance is not only to oppose and to try to lobby and to try to urge government to henceforth save what can be saved with the AGOA leg and the motor leg and instill confidence, but also to be proactive in saving communities and rebuilding communities. And I think that our plan on the recovery side will be to compile a team of experts to assist us with looking at, for example, a community like Van der Bijl Park, which might be stuck in this one battle of duplicating what has been done in the Highveld steel area, for example. So looking at innovative ways of rebuilding and recovering a community. Like Marius has said, in the Highveld instance, for example, 21 businesses are renting from Highveld. So there's a business park that's been created. There's training opportunities that are provided. So innovative ideas of in the aftermath of a battle, rebuilding and often the workers and we see ourselves as playing an important role there. It will come down to us to rebuild, and we've seen that in the Highveld instance, that government doesn't necessarily take active steps in rebuilding that, because they often have played a part in the demise on a policy on account of harmful policy. So we see that as an important leg, and we will be starting proactively to already look at that, to be able to give hope to workers which who now see this looming on the horizon, and to be able to say, well, we're actively waging the war, but we're also in the background providing the medical assistance, so to speak, and the recovery side. And that's an important leg that I think will assist us in also building a new model, not only on the social side of sustaining communities with food and so forth, but also to reskill the jobless and the community to be able to again give them the opportunity to provide for their families. So yes, having said that, also I think important, the two other battles is the AGOA battle and the motor industry battle, which is looming, and government is really challenged to be able to proactively try to save what can be saved now, the steel war has begun. We know that the Department of Trade and Industry is working very hard behind the scenes to try and influence the decision. But on a policy level, we know that harmful policies, have an effect. Policies that on land and so forth, as Marius has said, it has an effect, and the effect comes down to a worker losing, a person losing a job, and 6 or 10 dependents, not having an income. That is the effect of that, and there's a fine balancing act and real leadership is necessary from the government at this stage. I don't know if there's any other questions or comments. You're welcome to afterwards, also talk to Dirk and Marius. So if there isn't anything, I want to thank you for being present today, and thank you for your inputs. Please join us afterwards for refreshments on the stoop outside. Thank you.